Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. Today is Wednesday the 21st of September 2022, and in this programme we'll be marking the second anniversary of the signing of the Abraham Accords between Israel, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, and asking, can these accords survive, and what are the geostrategic challenges to the Abraham Accords? We're also talking about, is this the final tribulation peace agreement that the Antichrist signs with Israel and breaks it halfway through, known as the 7-year peace treaty that he signs with Israel? So to join me on tonight's programme, I'm joined by my good friend Alistair Scott, the UK Director for Joseph Storehouse. So it's great to see you, Alistair.
Yeah, it's good to be with you.
Thank you for being here today.
Yeah,
What are your thoughts on the Abraham Accords? Because, the Abraham Accords were unveiled on the 15th of September 2020 with a big fanfare on the White House lawn. It was all under the patronage of the US President Donald Trump that looked like this may bring in a new era of peace and reconciliation in the Middle East, and remarked a remarkable change. But this was all signed in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and 2 years on, it looks like now the Abraham Accords are in danger of becoming obsolete.
Yeah, it was a great idea at the time, and as you say, it was right in the midst of so much bad news or sad news with the COVID situation. And it was almost Trump's final major signing, or whatever you want to call it. And of course, there was a lot of hope at the time that people were hoping that this would be a time of stronger alliances with Israel and its neighbours, their near neighbours. And of course, it also came under the whole threats from Iran, and which has continued right through to this day. I think at the time it was hoped that other nations would join. I mean, Morocco has kind of been involved, in Sudan too since. But as you say, there are many positive things that have happened. There's been trade agreements between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain and so on. But I don't think it's developed in the way that President Trump of the time was hoping, and maybe a lot of other people and leaders of the nations that were hoping it would lead to peace. But as you say, as you introduced, there's going to be this time where there's apparent peace, but it's going to fall apart. And we can see what's going on all the way around Israel at the moment with the nations that are, the major nations such as Iran's alliance with Russia and so on. So, yeah, the threats carry on, but we've got to continue as believers to pray for a relationship, because the Lord does want these nations to be blessed, and they will be blessed if they stand with Israel. So UAE are doing a grand job. There's a good relationship between them and Israel. Morocco and some of the others haven't developed in the same way, but we got to pray and believe for a harvest of souls from those nations anyway.
Absolutely. So just to remind you, we are live, we are interactive tonight, so I'd love to know your views and your opinions. So please feel free to either email or text into the programme. And tonight's question is, will there ever be a peace in the Middle East? That's our big question for tonight. Alistair, I mean, what's also interesting about the Abraham Accords, for example, because this is the first time that brought acceptance and recognition of the Jewish state's position in the Middle East, seen by our former Arab enemies, not as an enemy, but as an ally and an asset. According to my notes here, the Israeli relations with the Gulf states have gone from strength to strength and have led to agreements on tourism and defence. Trade between these two nations is now worth $2 billion annually. That's $2 billion, and expected to pass $10 billion in 5 years. We've also seen, as you mentioned, Morocco and Sudan later followed on suit, and there was big speculation this summer that Saudi Arabia would also join the Abraham Accords, but I think that was very much scuppered by Joe Biden when he came on his state visit to Israel and to Jordan, and also to the Palestinian Authority, and also to the Saudis. Put an end to that, essentially. And of course, the other major issue is that what brought all what initiated, I think, the Abraham Accords was namely the threat from a nuclear Iran, and knowing that that President Trump changed US foreign policy to empower the Saudis, to empower the Israelis to be the main allies of the United States in the region to push back on the Iranian nuclear threat. And of course, he pulled out of that awful Iran agreement back in 2018. And with it, the Arab states felt safe that here we are, we've got the United States that is backing Israel, backing the Saudis against the Iranians, and that they felt safe under his leadership. And I think that is what birthed really the Abraham Accords, because those agreements between the Israelis and in Bahrain and also the United Arab Emirates they were under the surface. They have diplomatic relations, but of course what they wanted to do was to bring them to the fore. So it's quite extraordinary that last week represented the second anniversary, and they had so much potential in bringing peace and reconciliation, but a change in geostrategic dynamics in the Middle East, a change in US foreign policy under Biden has now put these in jeopardy. I don't think that Israel's relationship with the United Arab Emirates is anywhere at risk, but the prospect that this could develop to the Saudis, even talk about bringing Indonesia, the largest Muslim nation in the world, into the Abraham Accords. In Iraq, Democrats were wanting to align themselves with Israel as well, and saying that Iraq should recognize Israel's right to exist and make peace. I mean, it's extraordinary. That happened last year, but so much has changed since then that they're in real danger.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think if the elections in the USA had gone in a different direction and the Republicans had remained in power, I'm sure there'd have been far more of a push to involve the other nations. But as soon as the election result came in and you've got the Democrats in, they are going to totally go in the different direction. They were never keen on this direction in the first place. And so it's not surprising. We've seen things begin to fizzle out. It was sad about the whole thing with Saudi Arabia, because there was a few little signs of things being a little bit better. They were opening up their airways and so on. So that was great news for Israel, because it meant, if they were traveling east, it didn't mean a huge detour. They could have a straight crossing. But the friendship side of it and the alliance side of it, I mean, the good things are there's great tourism going on between Israel and the UAE particularly, and Bahrain and so on, and vice versa. So there are flights coming in from the Islamic nations into Israel so that they can go into the center of Jerusalem and visit those sites. But it hasn't developed anywhere like it could have done had there been a different result of the US election. But yes, we just got to wait and watch and see. I mean, those figures you just quoted, $2 billion of trade going between the nations, and within 5 years hope to be up to 10. That's a huge increase, because they would never have traded at all before. But I think, it works both ways, because there's no doubt that the Middle Eastern nations realize the technological advances in Israel, and they need it. So they're aware of the Iran strength and power base in the Middle East, so they want to counter it, but it's never. There's always a hidden agenda. There's a selfish reason for this alliance to take place as well, because they see one another as a potential support. Israel not seeing the other side, but Israel seeing it as a peaceful potential, and making friends with some of the enemies that surround them, and also working together. So it's an interesting conundrum over there.
Absolutely. And of course, 2 years ago, everyone was talking about where does the Abraham Accords fit into kind of Bible prophecy. I think I had to watch it on YouTube, because our mainstream media didn't cover it. They didn't want to give President Trump any diplomatic credos for this historic peace agreement that his administration brought about. So just a reminder of how the Abraham Accords started. So it was in a dramatic and surprising joint announcement between the United States of America under President Donald Trump, together with Israel and the United Arab Emirates on the 13th of August 2020. Israel and the United Arab Emirates agreed to a peace treaty and a full normalisation of relations. White House officials said that the deal was to be known as the Abraham Accords and was brokered by senior White House official Jared Kushner, the US ambassador to Israel, David Freeman, and the Middle East envoy Avi Berkovich, and the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and White House National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien. This accord involved Israel and the United Arab Emirates and later Bahrain signing a bilateral agreements regarding investment, tourism, direct flights, security, telecommunications, and this would also involve the opening of embassies and exchange of ambassadors, flights from Abu Dhabi to Tel Aviv, and plans to bring Muslim pilgrims to Jerusalem to visit the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and for Israel at the time to suspend its declaration of sovereignty over Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria. The official signing of the Abraham Accords took place at a lavish ceremony on the White House lawn in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic on September the 15th, 2020, that was believed would kick off a new era of peace, reconciliation and security for the Middle East. Just to remind you that we are live, we are interactive tonight, so please feel free to email and text into your comments. And of course the big question, do you ever think there'll be peace in the Middle East? So we have CBN news report to go to now that's from 2 years ago that looked at the historical peace agreement between Israel and her former enemies in the Arab world known as the Abraham Accords.
Netanyahu called it a pivot of history toward peace.
It took us a full 26 years from Israel's second peace agreement with an Arab state to the third peace agreement. And now it's taken us only 29 days from the third peace agreement to the fourth. What a change.
That followed last month's announcement by the United Arab Emirates they would normalize ties with Israel. Netanyahu says the achievements will make a major impact for all involved.
This is a new era of peace for which I've been working for 25 years. These agreements will be a union of political peace and economic peace that will flow billions of dollars into our economy and investments, economic cooperation and ventures.
President Trump broke the news that Bahrain would join the peace effort.
They will exchange embassies and ambassadors, begin direct flights between their countries, and launch cooperation initiatives across a broad range of sectors, including health, business, technology, education, security, and agriculture. This is a truly historic day.
American Rabbi Mark Schneier says there was more than one factor pushing the agreements forward at this time.
First, you have this raging pandemic. It's only a natural alliance for the Gulf and for Israel to combat this virus together. You have the existentialist threat that continues to come from Iran, wanting to strengthen relations with the U.S. administration, and both the UAE and Bahrain were very concerned about the possibility of annexation on the part of the State of Israel. That was one of the contributing factors that created the tension to make this deal.
Schneier told CBN News the deals would be good for everyone.
When the King of Bahrain said to me time and time again that our only guarantee for a strong, moderate Arab presence in the Gulf is a strong Israel, the Gulf is looking to the State of Israel to be its defender, to be its protector.
Trump will preside over Tuesday's signing and says it's only the beginning, and indicated he expected others to follow quickly.
The momentum in the Gulf is to normalize ties, to make peace with Israel. It's a win-win, both for the Gulf and for the State of Israel.
There are 4 more Gulf states and other Muslim countries that could make peace with Israel. Chris Mitchell, CBN News.
I don't know about you, but that felt like a very, very long time ago. Even though it was 2 years ago, it felt like such a long time. But also what was so interesting, Alistair, about the signing of the Abraham Accords was that the Democrats always said, and also those American administrations involved in trying to bring about a peace settlement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, felt that a peace agreement with the Arab world was impossible without first solving the Palestinian problem. So essentially that the Palestinians themselves, leadership, were the gatekeepers to the rest of the Arab world. If Israel wants that acceptance and normalization of relations in the Middle East, then you have to go through us first. And what the Abraham Accords showed the complete opposite, because what President Trump did was completely froze the assets and the funding to the Palestinian Authority. He closed down their diplomatic offices in Washington. He stopped their funding because they refused to come into a place of wanting kind of to make a genuine peace with Israel. So they were completely bypassed in this whole process of the Abraham Accords, and this is why the Palestinian Authority themselves were absolutely furious with this agreement and furious with the Gulf states, because they felt that this was an act of betrayal. But also the other indicator of how this happened was that the Saudis gave a green light to it, and if the Saudis didn't give a green light to it, it wouldn't have happened in the first place.
That's right, and I remember, as you say, it seems like an age back when all that was done, and yet, as you say, it's just 2 years. But I remember that Donald Trump was offering future hope for the Palestinians if they came in line, but they were not going to, and it caused the whole thing to be even more difficult as far as getting peace. But as you say, it seemed like it would be dependent on some kind of peaceful solution between Israel and Palestine, and the Palestinian Authority down in Gaza, and yet it went ahead without that, and quite a lot of the kind of reports coming through at the time was that those nations, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and so on, were putting pressure on the Palestinians to actually play the game, because it would be better for them for the long run. And it certainly would have been, I'm sure, if they had agreed. But we know biblically the chance of there being a peace in the Middle East, there'll be some false peaces, but at the end of the day, we know that the nations will rise up against Israel, and Israel will see the victory because the Lord is on their side. But it will take a few tough situations, and we're living in tough times at the moment, but I think it's kind of a difficult situation over there.
Absolutely. So Santinder writes, good evening to you both. Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, was a key player in negotiations regarding these Abrahamic Accords. He's one to watch, I feel, especially as Donald Trump himself said that if anyone could bring peace to the Middle East, it would be Jared Kushner. Kushner's business address is even 666, I've heard this before, Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. We know from scripture the Antichrist will make a 7-year peace treaty with Israel, but whether or not these accords will develop into this treaty, only time will tell. Too obvious in my opinion, but who knows? Personally, I don't think that Jared Kushner would be the Antichrist. I think he misses one thing, and that's charisma. So I don't think he would be the person, but obviously he was absolutely instrumental in being the main architect of the Abraham Accords. But also we have to, if we put this in historical perspective, I think it was 16 years before Israel's previous peace treaty with Jordan in 1994. But the other major peace treaty Israel has in the Arab world is with both Egypt and, of course, Jordan. And then on the 26th of March 1979, again signed on the White House lawn between US President Jimmy Carter and Menachem Begin, and Anwar Sadat signed that historical peace treaty of 79. So I was only very little at the time, so about 4 years old. But I don't remember it, but I'm sure you do, Alistair.
Yeah, I was around. I was around and remember those dates under Jimmy Carter and so on. And yeah, I mean, it was a historic agreement then, and to be honest, it suited Egypt and Jordan because they had gone through a couple of major wars with Israel, which they would have thought won, and they didn't. So for them to sign a peace treaty, it was a peace treaty without the sort of relationship development that Donald Trump was talking about in this second Abraham Accords. But it was a significant time, and it certainly held its peace between those nations, because when other nations have come against Israel from Lebanon and from Syria and so on, and Gaza, they've tried to be, Egypt particularly, have tried to be peacemakers and in the midst of it. And with Jordan, they've kind of said the right politically correct things and kept out. So yeah, it was a significant time, but again, it didn't create a good relationship between Israel and those two nations. They are kind of like talking, but not best of mates. And you know, at the end of the day, the Jordanians and the Egyptians will be siding with their own people.
Four major wars, though. that Israel's had with Egypt, including a very big war that's not often mentioned in the history books, and that's the War of Attrition in '68, whereby the Israeli Air Force actually went up against not only Russian MiGs, but Russian pilots flying those MiGs. So it's the first time that any Western nation on side of the United States in the Cold War actually engaged with the Russians in armed combat, and Israel didn't have one loss and shot down all the Russian planes. So of course we had Israel's War of Independence, pushed back the Egyptians, and then again in the 1956 Suez Crisis. Suez War took control of the Sinai and then was told to give it up, and reassurances that the UN would protect Israel. And of course, we know that that never happened, which led to the Six-Day War of June 1967, where Israel captured what is known as the Sinai Peninsula, and then that surprise attack in 1973. And I think it was after that surprise attack the realization came upon Anwar Sadat that there's nothing we can do to defeat Israel in a kind of military conflict. What we can do is pursue peace, because this is in the best interest of Egypt and the Egyptian people. But also he had the realization and the foresight to change Egypt's alignment, because prior to the War of 1973, the Yom Kippur War, Egypt was a client state of the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and then after that war they switched sides and became a client state of America, which then made it easier to negotiate a peace. And of course what Israel did was completely give up all of the Sinai, completely dependent on its own energy and oil, in return for a peace that did start off as a warm peace with Anwar Sadat, because we know that he flew to the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, I think it was in 77 or 78, and talked about how he wanted peace, and he did want warm relations with Israel until he was assassinated in '81 by the Muslim Brotherhood, and changed everything. But also Israel was also then it wasn't until the 26th of October that Israel signed a peace treaty with Jordan as well. And Israel and Jordan have got on quite well, considering the rest of the Arab states, but now it's becoming more fractured. And of course Israel signed the Oslo Accords in '93, but it didn't lead to peace as well. So the difference between these peace and the peace that Israel signed with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Morocco and Sudan is that this was based on normalisation of relations. Israel didn't want another cold peace in the Middle East, and we're seeing that develop as well.
Well, I mean, the thing about all those wars from 1948, when the state of Israel was restarted, rebirth, every one of those wars were miraculous. I mean, every situation, they were outnumbered. They had strong. The enemy had stronger armory, planes, airplanes, jets, the lot. And yet every time they saw victory. And as you say, with next to no loss of life and destruction. So it's not surprising for Egypt and Jordan that they would want to make peace, because having thought they could overrun the small state of Israel with a very small population, they really did take a defeat. So it's not surprising that they would want to have a peaceful settlement of some kind. But as you say, even, I can remember those days with Gaza, with the whole Sinai Peninsula being given back, and it was a difficult time, but it was part of the agreement to have a peaceful relationship. And as you said, it led to the death of the president of Egypt being assassinated because of making a peace agreement. So these things are always going to happen. Where there's a peace agreement, there's going to be those who are anti and totally against it, and will come against their own or come against Israel if they can, to try and entice and cause another battleground. So, but God is for Israel, and He continues to be for Israel, and He continues to do miracles for the nation, and we see that even in our own history, in our own time. So, it's an interesting place to watch over. And I know you love and study Israel, and have done even through university, and it's a great history that they have.
Absolutely. There's also a very good Netflix film called The Angel, which is all about this. It's about a kind of secret Egyptian. He's actually married to he's married to Nasser's daughter. And he very much wants to see Egypt go forward and actually to become a modern nation, to actually develop the Egyptian economy, to develop a better life for the citizens of Egypt. So he works behind the scenes to warn of Israel of a coming war, the Yom Kippur War of 73. So if you want to see behind the scenes, that's a great film. Okay. That's on Netflix to watch as well. But also, I mean, if we look now 2 years on, I mean, there was so much promise with the Abraham Accords that the Arab Sunni states would sign up and actually join 2 years on, with a great hope that the Saudis would also normalise relations with Israel, which would have been absolutely incredible had they done so. And yet what we saw in President Biden and the Democrats come to power was essentially to scrap the Abraham Accords, not really felt to have any particular value. Let's go back to our old failed policies towards the Middle East that we have done for decades. Let's try and pursue another Iran nuclear agreement. Let's empower the Palestinians. And of course, with that framework, and let's isolate as well the Saudis as well. So everything that President Trump did, Joe Biden did in the reverse. So is it no wonder that we're seeing that this has led to more extremism, more violence, more terrorism in the Middle East? Because when President Trump was actually in office, Hezbollah was actually running out of money. Yeah, exactly. The Iranian regime was on the verge of kind of economic collapse because the sanctions were biting so much. And yet in 2 years, we have a complete reversal.
That's the thing, is the sanctions were really working, and despite their threatening speaking reports they were giving out, they were in a difficult situation. And now the Biden administration is just pouring money back and opening up the doors for finance to go into Iran, and trying to broker this deal with the whole nuclear. And we know that the nuclear plan is to be used to get rid of Israel if they can. Just like Egypt and Jordan and the other nations, they won't succeed, but it's going to cause a lot of disruption and problems for the rest of the nations of the world as well. So difficult, but it's important. I mean, Trump was great. He talked strong and he behaved strong, and he backed himself up. He backed up the nation USA with the threats that they made. So it made a difference. It made a difference to Iran in a big way. But you're seeing things turning around, and they've got the funds now to be more effectively financing terrorism and preparation of attacks against Israel. And Israel are aware of it. They are, at the moment, even this last couple of weeks, been carrying out, they're preparing for war from the north. And of course, they are looking very closely at the nuclear development from Iran. Something is going to happen fairly soon, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So we got an email from Wayne from South Wales, a beautiful part of the world. It says, good evening both. Israel will be the lead nation on earth during the 1,000-year reign of Christ. It will happen because the scriptures say so. He will return with his church in chapter 19 of Revelation. Israel will not share its God-given homeland with the Palestinians. Palestine was named as Philistina after the Roman leader Hadrian killed off the Bar Kokhba uprising in 135 AD, and over 500,000 Jews were killed. Why did he change the name Jerusalem? Satan wanted Israel's capital forgotten forever. He has failed, and Jerusalem is restored, and our Messiah will rule from there on his return. That's a great email, so I really appreciate that one. And of course, the big question for in tonight's program, will there ever be peace in the Middle East? As Christians, we have an answer to that, but I want to know what you think. This one says, this is a poem, When Christians Pray for Israel, from Dennis, who writes, behold the scriptures old and new, God's mercy page by page. Consider too the chosen few, encompassing each age. Then think back on the miracle that Israel truly was. Reflect upon the life of Paul and Christ and upon his cross. Remember Pentecost as well, the day the church was born. The devil's kingdom to dispel, in tatters battered, torn. And with the reminders such as these, for Israel we should pray. for wealth and health and precious peace beyond the present day. That was superb. So thank you very much for Dennis. I enjoyed reading your wonderful poem out. Very good. We've got a CBN news item to go to now, and this is critics warning that Biden's unwillingness to use military force against Iran could unveil the Abraham Accords.
When President Biden came to visit both Israel and Saudi Arabia, things began to change in the region as agreements for mutual defense between Israel and neighboring Arab countries began to fall apart.
The security architecture, publicly at least, unraveled. It was canceled, and the UAE instead is now trying to reestablish diplomatic relations with Iran, as are some of the other countries. So it seems that they measured the United States' commitment to confronting Iran up, measured it as too weak, and are trying to come to some terms with the Iranians.
Middle East expert David Wormser says the unwillingness of the Biden administration to present a credible military threat towards Iran puts the Sunni Gulf countries in a vulnerable position.
Because alone, they really can't stop the Iranians. They can't defend themselves effectively against the Iranians. So they only have one or two choices. One choice is to try to grovel in front of the Iranians, which is the path they're beginning to show some sign of. The second path is to find a new strong horse, a new patron of power that can help defend them.
In addition to the defense concerns, the Biden administration is also making a change to the Abraham Accords by reintroducing the Oslo framework for Middle East peace talks, by bringing in Jordan, Qatar, and the Palestinian Authority. But other countries don't support that idea.
The Saudis, the others, the other Arabs, they do not like the PLO. They do not like what they're doing in various areas. So by forcing that back in, it actually threatened the Abraham Accords. Again, fortunately, I think the overriding interests of the countries are so strong that the Abraham Accords will survive, but it will not be with U.S. coordination.
Former Special Envoy for the Abraham Accords, Aryeh Lightstone, says these Gulf countries are frustrated.
There's a feeling of, what are we going to do for the next 26 months?
Lightstone says if the U.S. doesn't lead, other nations are waiting to take over.
There's no coincidence that Putin showed up to Iran just as Biden left the region. There's a competition here. If the U.S. doesn't lead, Russia or China will. It's absolutely in our interest to lead. And those countries want to be led by us. They want to follow with us. They want to stand next to us. They don't want to sit next to Putin. They don't want to sit next to the Chinese. They're not interested in that. But if we're not there, the Russians and the Chinese are.
Fill the vacuum.
So there you go. That, I think, brings in a very good perspective on what we are seeing in the Middle East today, and also the geostrategic shifts that are taking place in the region. I was just telling to you that I know David Wormser, Dr. David Wormser, pretty well, and he's a great guy. And if you read any of his articles, and he writes some great articles for the Jewish News Syndicate and others, and he talks about how in the Middle East, with Arab politics and Middle Eastern politics, that these Arab states need a strong horse to back. And at the moment, the United States was the big horse, really until the Obama administration, and really then Obama just really pulled the United States out of the Middle East, which left a big vacuum. So the likes of the Gulf states, the Saudis, are looking for a strong horse or a strong nation to back that will actually be their protector and actually protect them. So what we're seeing at the moment, there was some hope that and this is why the Abraham Accords again were so successful, is because the Americans were backing the Israelis as the most powerful military and political force in the Middle East, backed up by the Saudis against the Iranians. And of course, with the Biden administration pushing for an Iranian nuclear agreement, which is absolutely insane, because you are offering the world's most dangerous regime, the world's most dangerous weapons, and giving them billions in sanctions relief that they can spend on exporting terrorism around the world, only to sign an agreement that they never signed before in 2015, only to be followed by a couple of years of actually having a nuclear breakout and having nuclear weapons anyway. It is absolute madness. And of course, what that is doing is empowering the extremists that we're seeing. And it's also the first anniversary of the horrendous US withdrawal from Afghanistan or the horrendous scenes we saw in Kabul airport a year ago, which means that the Biden administration has no authority. They don't back up what they say by force, and no one takes them seriously, which has empowered the Iranians, the Palestinian Authority, and the extremist elements in the region. And this is what's making life very, very difficult for Israel right now.
As you say, there's a vacuum will always be filled, and that was one thing with the USA. They have stood as a strong friend to Israel, but are pulling out under this presidential group now. But as believers, as Christians, we really do need to pray for these midterm elections, because if there is a changing of the guard in the Senate, then we have a turning around, and then the potential of the Democrats' plans being thwarted or stopped, arrested, really. So we do, even though USA is the other side of the Atlantic, it's an important time as Christians to be praying for this to turn around, because I mean, if USA continues the way they are in their kind of attitude to Israel and their attitude towards Iran, they're going to lose their place as a big horse anyway, and there's the danger. Who takes that place? Can we as United Kingdom get in there? Things are looking far more promising as far as our relationship with Israel. It's getting better and better governmentally as well. But it's an important thing that we don't see this development with Putin and Iran and Turkey allying together, and they're threatening all the time now Israel, and trying to stop them from taking any actions against Syria, as we've seen recently, and certainly they are telling them to keep their hands off Iran. But Israel will do what they have to do, and God will be on their side again.
Amen. Amen to that. This is an email from Anita, who writes, "Hi Simon and Alistair. It's lovely to see you both. Historically speaking, there has always been conflict in the Middle East, but some may argue that it hasn't been any worse than Europe and elsewhere. The problem is that Israel is essentially a target for other Muslim nations. Hamas in Palestine want all the Israelis dead. After all, there are so many terrorist groups and extremists. Apparently, according to the Human Rights Organization, just months after the 8-year Iran-Iraq war ended, he was part of the so-called Death Commission that oversaw the disappearing and secret execution of thousands of political prisoners. Somehow, I very much doubt that there will ever be peace. We can nevertheless pray." Scripture, Isaiah 46, verse 9 to 10. "Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, I will accomplish my purposes." Blessings and love, Anita. Brilliant email, so thank you so much. And please feel free to email or text into the program. Do you think that there will ever be peace in the Middle East? But it does make you think that our whole concept of peace, particularly when it comes to the Middle East, is very, very different to the ones that we have here in Britain and the ones we have in Europe. I mean, might not particularly like our neighbours on the continent, but there's certainly, we don't have armed conflict, we don't have a diplomatic war. Sometimes arguments can get a bit heated between us and our European neighbours, but essentially there's cooperation, there's mutual respect, and there's a friendship there. But that's not the case in the Middle East. The Middle East, if you want peace, it's a different kind of peace. It's one that comes out through strength. And the only way that you can survive in the Middle East is to be a strong, powerful nation backed up by military force that Israel is. And this is why Israel is the power that she is today, because of that force. But also we know that Israel is there because God planted her there in fulfillment of biblical prophecy. So we know that Israel's not going anywhere. We also know that if you look at some of the old kind of news reports, and there's a great organization called MEMRI, called the Middle East Media Research Institute. And a couple of years ago, they were showing imams in Saudi Arabia saying, we need to make peace with Israel because Israel has surpassed all these other empires, and yet we have all this strife, all these problems, and yet Israel flourishes. And there's this astonishment that Israel is still there, but not only still there, but absolutely flourishing.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Anyone who has eyes to see and looks at this little nation with such a small population, and you know, last time I was in Israel, looking across at the expanse of Tel Aviv and looking at the expanse of Jerusalem, and you think it's 1948 when that state was reborn, and how much they've achieved, not only physically, but technologically and every other way. So I mean, it's not surprising for nations to suddenly awaken and look, we better be friends with the lost because they're doing well and we're struggling, and it's a good reason for being a friend, because Genesis 12 verse 3 says, I'll bless those who bless you and those who curse you will be cursed. So it's important for these nations to get that understanding. But you know, we know, going back all the way to the book of Exodus, Egypt tried to overthrow the Israelites as they went out, and they failed. They were totally destroyed. The army was destroyed in the Red Sea. And it will happen over and over again until the nations really learn to befriend and stand with Israel. But again, if you look at prophetic word, we know that the nations are going to come against Israel. There may be a time of peace, but it's a false peace. You know, people will say peace, peace, when there is no peace, as the prophetic words come out. And eventually the nations will ally against Israel, and again, that will bring the Lord battling for them again, as he did with Jehoshaphat back in 2 Chronicles 20, and they will see the victory.
No, absolutely. There's some interesting remarks here, for example, that critics note that the Abraham Accords have failed in several ways. First, they've not led to any new agreements with other Gulf Cooperation Council countries, such as Oman, Qatar or Saudi Arabia. They do not appear to have led to an improved view of Israel on the street, and the agreements also have not led to any tangible improvement on the Palestinian front. So in March of 2022, known as the Negev Summit, a gathering of foreign ministers from Bahrain, Egypt, Israel, Morocco and the United Arab Emirates, facilitated by the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, ended up in failure because Blinken went off course and used the summit to talk about the Palestinian issue instead of focusing on Iran, and that's why they were all there. We also see, for example, that while the headlines tells of constable and injurious encounters between the Israelis and the Arabs in the Gulf and in Morocco, the data shows a worrying and unmistakable trend as time goes on, that the Abraham Accords are becoming less popular on the streets of Israel's allies. So according to the Washington Institute, a poll showed that 45% of Bahrainians held a very positive or somewhat strong views on the agreements in November of 2020. That support now has steadily eroded to less than 20% of March of this year. The trend is the same in the United Arab Emirates. 49% of the country that disapproved of the Abraham Accords in 2020 has grown to over 2/3 in the past month, and only 31% of Moroccans favour normalisation, according to an Arab barometer. So we can see here, really, can't we, that despite Israel hoping that she'll develop normalisations with the Arab Sunni world, it may have worked at a high government level,
yes.
And it may have worked on a kind of business level, but hasn't penetrated the people. They haven't seen the benefits of what is known as the peace dividend.
Yeah. I mean, this is it, isn't it? It was never that popular amongst the general populace, but it was the government level. They realized the advantage of having Israel as a friend, as a trade partner, and so on. But time is eroding even, it's making it even worse amongst the populace of those nations. And I guess that early thought that there's going to develop into friendships between many nations didn't happen. And then we've seen war after war happen in Ukraine, Russia, and how that's affected the whole world. It's not only affected those two nations, it's affected the Middle East, it's affected us in Europe. So I guess in some ways there's disappointment. Maybe the expectancy was too high, but it's a good relationship. And as we read those figures earlier, it has meant that they've been trading, and there has been flights going in and out, and tourist trade going between those nations. But it's never going to develop quite the way, unless you get Trump back in the next election. It could be inflamed again, the agreements. But yeah, it's a difficult situation there.
Oh, definitely. So we're about 10 minutes left of the programme, Alistair. So I think it's time we reflect on a little bit of theology, because we know, according to Daniel 7 and Revelation 13, that Israel is expecting a false peace. They don't believe it will be a false peace, and this will be made by the Antichrist, but it won't be called the Antichrist at the time. He will probably be called the president of a one-world government, and he will make a peace treaty with Israel that will last for 7 years. And this is when the period known as the tribulation period kicks off. And then, of course, we know that he breaks that halfway through. And during that time, we see the third temple is rebuilt. And the question is, what kind of peace will it be? Will this be a protection peace between Israel and maybe a United States of Europe that is the most dominant power during the tribulation period, or will it be more of a fact that Israel would have to surrender her sovereignty as a nation to become part of a world government, and in return for that Israel is offered the reconstruction of the third temple in Jerusalem? These are kind of very important questions, because this is where prophetically we're heading towards.
Yeah, for sure. And you can see this whole sort of globalist move is rampant at the moment. I've never seen things develop so quickly as they are in the last 6 months to a year. And you can see that would be the controlling element which would try and enforce Israel into making peace with its supposed enemies. And the kind of talk will be all about we're looking for world peace, and we're looking for everyone to have a good life. But it's the beginning of the Antichrist, and that's the thing. We've been talking about it over and again over the program. This is what is written in the Bible, and that's what is going to come to pass. So, man can make his negotiations and have his ideas, but at the end of the day, the Lord does triumph. We know these things are going to happen. There's going to be the tribulation, but in the midst of that tribulation, the Lord is promised in Joel 3:16, I will be a shelter to my people. So for us, not only should we be praying and watching, but watch and pray, but also being vigilant and listening into the Lord's instruction to us as individuals, as a group, as a body, to be praying for people to have their eyes opened and to make the right decision for eternity, and choose to life rather than death, and choose blessing rather than cursing. And standing with Israel is a great starting point. So yeah, those scriptures, those references are there. The Antichrist will come, but he's not going to see the victory. He'll be there for a short time, and then he's removed when the Lord comes and rules and reigns. Which is what we're looking for.
It just brings me to an interesting conversation I had a few weeks ago with my good friend Bill Koenig, who wrote the book Eye to Eye, and currently he's relocated from Washington DC area to Texas, and he's saying that he's got a friend now that is a farmer, and they're taking the red heifers out to Israel this month. In preparation for the rebuilding of the third temple. So we know that things are prophetically speeding up. I think, when we reflect upon world events, there's never been a time of such great deception upon the world. We know that there is no longer any kind of truth. And when you don't have truth and you don't have moral clarity, it's so much easier to believe in lies. And by doing that, we know that there is a dark agenda to bring in a kind of world government behind the scenes, and our nation states are rapidly falling around us, and the whole concept of capitalism, the whole concept of a nation state is definitely being very threatened. And what's reminded me so much of how much has changed in the past 2 years since that historic signing on the White House lawn between US President Donald Trump and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and the two leaders from the United Arab Emirates and also Bahrain, is that almost as if we're now in a completely different world to then, one that's gone out of control. We know the Iranian regime is very, very close to acquiring nuclear weapons, and without America standing up to that Iranian nuclear threat and backing Israel, the Middle East is going to be more unstable. And that's why as Christians we're told to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, that God's presence would be in Jerusalem, that we would be watchmen and women on the walls of Jerusalem.
Absolutely, and never hold your peace. You know, we talked about earlier, you can learn from history or learn from the Bible. And the Bible is going to be the one which will always remain the truth. So yes, we do need to take lessons from history. And I guess we talked about earlier about Europe being kind of or Western Europe being more inclined to have a peaceful relationship because they learned from 2 world wars, the terrible price that was paid. But you know, biblically we've got to watch the signs and be a people who will not. We need to be watchmen on the walls of Jerusalem. This morning we had a prayer meeting for Israel, and it just was so strong, praying for the peace of Jerusalem. Particularly, you know, we've talked about a couple of the wars, Yom Kippur War. This is a season where the enemies tend to rise up and try to catch Israel off guard, but they'll never catch the God of Israel off guard, because he never slumbers or sleeps, and he's ready to be the defense of Israel. But this is an important time for us as believers to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem and the borders, because it's very often during this Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Feast of Tabernacles time, when the enemies think they may have a chance to get in there. So all of you watching, great that we've been getting emails from you, but more important than anything is just remain prayerful and vigilant in our prayer lives.
Also, we also have to pray for the United Arab Emirates as well, as well as Bahrain, because they've entered into an agreement with Israel. They know that they are getting kind of security benefits from that, economic benefits from that. They're getting kind of innovation, cutting edge innovation, which will accelerate their nations in terms of their dominance and influence, not only in the Gulf, but also throughout the Middle East. And there is a change. There is a change that happens and there is a blessing, as we know from, as you said, Genesis 12, 1-3, that I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you. So we know that the United Arab Emirates will come into a blessing. The question is, will the United States allow Israel to become that strong player as they did under Trump? Will they challenge the kind of nuclear threat posed by Iran to the region? And only then will we see a kind of more peace and stability in this very dark region, because we know it's not ever going to be real peace, because the whole Middle East is like a tender cake. It's just one little fuse and everything lights up.
One spark and it clears. But I mean, you know, you're very right there about the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. They have made a strong stand to be friends of Israel, but there'll be a lot of pressure coming on them to renege on that, to break away from that. And as long as they remain strong with Israel, they will see the blessing. They will see economy flourishing. Not that the economy is doing badly at the moment, but it's important to pray for those nations, as you say.
Absolutely. Alistair, always a pleasure doing a programme with you. Very much appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I just want to thank you for watching at home, and to our Jewish friends and to the nation of Israel, I want to wish you a Shana Tova, a Happy New Year for the weekend. Pray that you'd have a sweet year, and it's a very special festival because it starts the Feast of Trumpets, and of course then followed by the most solemn day in the Jewish calendar, which is Yom Kippur, and then of course Sukkot as well. So we pray that Israel would be at peace during this new year. I want to thank you for watching Behind the Headlines tonight. Let's continue to be watchmen and women on the walls of Jerusalem to pray for Israel and the Jewish people. So thank you for watching tonight's Behind the Headlines.